good morning to everyone. Appreciate everyone being here. Last week we started into Christian evidences, and again, the point being we need to be prepared so that we can, answer the questions when people ask them. Parts of this class are Bible, parts of this class are more technical. And we're going to start out a little more technical this week, but I'm going to try to explain it hopefully in a manner that folks can understand. Sometimes folks try to make this stuff complicated because they think, well, if I talk over your head, then you'll think, well, I'm an expert, and to me, an expert can explain it to where people understand. And there are parts of this that I've been looking at that will, you read whole paragraphs and every word in them is giant. And that's unfortunate, because we need to make things where we can understand it. So, for Tom's sake, we're going to talk about thermodynamics.
Go ahead.
I went to a community college for a couple of years, and when I went to University of Florida, my very first class was thermodynamics. It was first period every day of the week and a test period on Monday night.
Well, I apologize for being late, but I'd like to say I was lady late.
I understand. So the professor comes in and he writes his name on the board, and it's Dr. Gator. And I thought, well, school pride and all that's great, but it seems a bit much. And his name actually wasn't spelled the same as an alligator is, but anyway. So we have had college thermodynamics. So the first thing you got to understand before you get into this first law, second law, all that kind of stuff, is there's an open system, there's a closed system, and there's an isolated system. And it's pretty straightforward. If you have an item, a person, the earth, this room, this building, you can draw a line around wherever you want and say, that's my system I'm going to look at today. It can be a heat and air, HVAC system. It could be, the refrigerator in the kitchen is my system. Okay, so an open system is one that it can take matter, mass, can go in and out of it, and energy can go in and out of it. And so you as a human being are an open system. You take food in, you let stuff out, and you take energy in. If you're sitting here on a heated seat in your car, you're taking in energy. If you're outside in the cold this morning, you're giving off energy. Okay, so we're an open system. Okay, the next level is a closed system. And what they would call a closed system is one that doesn't take in any mass or lose any mass, so you don't add things to it, but it does have energy can enter or exit. And an example of that is the earth. The earth doesn't, you could have a meteorite come in and hit the earth, but it's minuscule, it has no effect. I don't know how much the earth weighs, but it doesn't add any mass to it. Or we can send off a satellite and you have this infinitesimal amount of mass, but effectively the earth doesn't gain or lose any mass. It's just here, out in space. But it does gain energy. The sun shines and energy comes from the sun to the earth. That's our major source of energy, historically and now, is energy from the sun, heats up the earth. So it's considered a closed system because it doesn't gain any weight or gain or lose any, but it gains energy. An isolated system is one that doesn't interact at all with its surroundings. So it doesn't gain any mass, doesn't gain any energy. It is just what it is. It's isolated. Now you could maybe make a box that was really well insulated and nothing goes in or out of the box because it's so insulated, no heat goes in or out. That could be considered isolated. But in our case, the universe is an isolated system. You draw a big enough box around the whole universe and nothing's going in or out, no mass, no energy. So we consider the universe isolated, the earth a closed system, and a person and or other things like this room. This room is an open system. You come into it, you add mass to it. You know, heat is leaving through the walls right now. We got the heater on, putting heat in, you know, burning natural gas. So it's an open system. Any questions on those three definitions?
The astronauts go out of the Earth but come into the Earth. Are you talking about the Earth's mass going straight down into the Earth?
No, just you know, including the people on the Earth. We don't have enough, you know, if you send a rocket up, it weighs so many tons, but the Earth is millions of tons. So it effectively isn't losing any mass or gaining any. We don't have like, you know, like this room gains, you know, say a ton worth of people walked in here for class, and then we'll walk back out. So it is significant. So the Earth doesn't gain any significant amount of energy. It gains energy, but it doesn't gain any significant amount of mass or lose any.
It's hard for me to, you were talking about the big circle around the universe. That's way over my head,
Right.
trying to think of the universe.
Right, but you know, if you
Yeah.
take everything, you draw this giant circle, nothing's going in, nothing's going out. And that's where we talked about it a little bit last week about the design of the universe. And we'll part of this is sort of review in a way. So when you got to have this defined so you know, because the laws of conservation of mass, conservation of energy, it matters if it's an open system or a closed system. Okay, so when we talk about conservation of mass, this is a law of science. This law says that mass cannot be created or destroyed. It can be rearranged in space, or it can be changed in form. So you can have water, and you can freeze water, and it'll turn from a liquid to a solid, and you can melt it, turn it back to a liquid. You can evaporate it, turn it to a gas. It can change form. So you can have water and it changes form, and when it turns to water vapor, you may not see it, but it's still weighed the same. And you can have chemical reactions. If you took two chemicals and mixed them together, if you take hydrogen gas, you can burn hydrogen gas, oxidize it, and you'll get water. Okay? If you measured the mass accurately of the hydrogen and of the oxygen that is used to burn it, when you combine it, the water will weigh the same. It's the same amount of mass. You don't create mass, you don't lose mass, but you can change it around. That's the law of conservation of mass. That is one of the big problems with the Big Bang Theory, which was you didn't have anything, and bang, now we got this whole universe. Well, wait a minute, where did you don't create mass, you conserve mass. You have the same amount before as you have after. So if you burn this podium, you would take the weight of this podium, and the ashes from it won't weigh as much, but you will have turned it into carbon monoxide and you would have created other things. And if you saved them all up and weighed them, it'd be the same.
I never understood that or never even thought about it, but like a few years ago, acid rain. You burn something, smoke goes up. When it rains, it brings it back down. It goes into the earth, corn, whatever.
Right.
But that's I never thought about. Nothing could be destroyed actually.
Right.
Completely. That's what you're saying.
It turns into something else, but it's the same mass, the same weight. And I'm using mass and weight interchangeably because we're sitting here on the earth, but if it was somewhere else, that might not be perfect, technically correct. Okay, another law, conservation of energy, says that that the total energy of an isolated system, again, one that none's going in or out, is a constant. Energy can be transformed from one form to another. It's neither created nor destroyed. And there are multiple forms of energy. There's potential energy, which is, take a roller coaster. If you raise a roller coaster up to the top, it has potential energy. When you let it go down the hill, kinetic energy is motion. Potential energy is, you know, I have the apple hanging in the tree, but when the stem breaks, it falls and hits Isaac Newton on the head. Then you've turned that potential energy, something's up high, into kinetic energy, which is motion. And kinetic energy can also be rotating. It doesn't have to be going in a straight line. It can go in a different pattern, but you can turn energy into rotating energy, which happens like in a car engine. And you can also have internal energy. So a person, you have internal energy. Different chemicals have internal energy. And so when you combine them, you can take the internal energy and you give it off as another form of heat. So the first law of thermodynamics is just a version of this law, a bigger law of conversion of energy. So when people talk about the first law of thermodynamics, tells you that energy is not created or destroyed, they're actually stating the law of conservation of energy, because the first law is just more like energy. It's about energy transfer more than that. Okay, so both of these things are inconsistent with the Big Bang, which was like, okay, you had nothing, and then now all of a sudden we have mass, we have the whole universe's mass, and you had no energy, and all of a sudden you have all of the energy and all of the suns and stars, and so when it's inconsistent that the Big Bang could happen with the laws of science. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, is the scientists are the ones going, well, yeah, the Big Bang, and they have slight variants of that theory now, because they're like, well, that doesn't work. And so we know that those are not really consistent with science. And that's the point that I want to make, is that if you want to claim to be a scientist, you better come up with a better plan, because you can't do the Big Bang and have something created from nothing. You can't have energy created from nothing. So that's the whole point of this when folks talk about it. So the second law of thermodynamics is about the term entropy. And, you know, we don't use the term entropy all the time. I understand that. And entropy kind of has two definitions. The first one is the lack of order, or it's like in a thermodynamic system, if you have this room full of gas and the molecules are moving around in here, okay? Well, that's kind of complicated, and we think about it, well, if you heat this room up, they'll move faster, but when you heat it up, you put energy in. But the second definition deals with how something is in disorder. Okay, so it tells us that entropy of an isolated system, entropy, the higher the number, the more disordered it is. So if you have something and you don't put any energy in, you don't try to improve it, it's just going to decline. It's going to basically fall into disorder. So you can add energy to a system. You could take this room and you could line the chairs up perfectly. But you know, you let the kids run through here, and we know they're going to get into more disorder. You know, if we have an earthquake, if we had all these chairs in this room in random order, can we have an earthquake and the chairs line themselves up perfectly? No, that won't happen. That's what entropy is about. things become more disorderly, they become more random, more unstructured, everything just runs down. And we know that, we look at things, so things become more disorganized. And how this applies to the universe is the folks that want to talk about evolution and the universe, which was unstructured, is now all of a sudden all of these structures and these galaxies spinning around, and they're organized as they spin. Well, the answer is the Big Bang didn't cause something like that to happen. It had to be designed and built that way. And the universe is running down, and they know it. It's expanding, it's running down.
I guess Mayfield would be a good example of disorientating and a mess.
Yeah, I mean, you have a tornado come through. Did it stack things up and build? Did we get anything out of that that's nicer and more organized and looks like, did the tornado splinter a tree and turn it into a piece of fine furniture like this? No, you won't find that. Okay, and the Bible even tells us in Matthew 6, chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. So we know that, we can buy a nice new car. That's got to be Dave's with that Lazy D tag on it. You buy this nice new car, and it's going to corrode, it's going to have issues, the battery's going to quit, you're going to get new tires because they wear. Things don't get better, they get worse. And so that's the concept that we want to make. And again, that we spent some time on that last week, but a little more time this week about the laws of thermodynamics, because I wanted people to hear those, because folks will throw them out and go, well, the first law of thermodynamics, and it's like, they tend to expand it, and they're not exactly telling you the first law. They are telling you the laws of conservation of energy. Any questions on entropy? Okay. I think I've wore everyone down. Everyone's looking down. We're going to move on to page number 5. The case for the existence of God, the human body, and our great designer. Okay, so Genesis tells us that, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. So can one reasonably expect that something as complex, and we're going to talk about this probably the rest of this week and next week, as our human body just sort of happened? It was, evolved from a single cell, and then all of a sudden it became multi-cell animals, and all of a sudden, it was a chimpanzee, and then it became a human being. And that's not, again, a reasonable scientific assumption, even though some of those folks will argue for that. George Gaylord Simpson of Harvard stated, when you come right down to it, the most incredible creation in the universe is you. With your fantastic senses and strengths, your ingenious defense systems and mental capabilities so great you can never use them to the fullest. Your body is a structural masterpiece, more amazing than science fiction. So you have scientists who recognize the complexity of our human body. Our body has 4 levels of detail. Cells are the smallest, and they're the smallest unit of life. You can have a single cell animal and it be alive. Then you have, moving up from that, and probably Priscilla can explain more about biology, human biology than I can. Tissues, you've got muscle tissue, brain tissue, nerve tissue, you've got different kinds of tissues in the body, and those are groups of cells that work together to carry out the same kind of activity. You've got organs, next level up. So you've got a heart, you've got a liver, you've got, maybe still got an appendix, you've got these different organs in your body, and that's where groups of tissues work together in unison. And then you have systems in your body. So you have the circulatory system, which is the heart and the blood vessels and all of that throughout your whole body. You have a reproductive system. And these are groups of organs working together to make your body function. So you have these different levels. And we're going to start out with the cells. We're going to start out at the basic level. We're going to talk about the complexity of a human cell, how even that is not something that just is going to happen at random. And that we are going to move up is kind of the plan. So a human body is composed of 250 different kinds of cells. So you got everything from red blood cells to fat cells to nerve cells. Some people got more, some than others. The 250 different kinds, 100 trillion cells in your body. So there's a huge number of these. They're different sizes. Some of them, 20,000 cells could fit in the size of an O on that piece of paper. So when you look at somewhere on this page, there's got to be an O, and 20,000 of them could fit in that. If you put the cells end to end, you think how, you look how big a person is. If you line the cells up end to end, they would encircle the earth over 200 times. So the cells are little, but obviously add up to our size. And they're made mostly of carbon and hydrogen, nitrogen, and sulfur. So they're a mixture of different chemicals. Lester and Heffley said, "We once thought that the cell, the basic unit of life, was a simple bag of protoplasm. Then we learned that each cell in any life form is a teeming microuniverse of compartment structures and chemical agents, and each human being has billions of cells." So you have different scientists talk about the cells, and they know, obviously, I'm not a biologist, I'm kind of reading this off. But where we're headed with this is that there are multiple cells, multiple kinds. Carl Sagan explained that we have a collection of 10 to the 14th cells, 10 with 14 zeros behind it, number of cells. And we're going to talk about big numbers some. I don't know how far we get through this, but our next piece is about probabilities. We're going to talk about big numbers. The information contained in a simple cell has around 10 to the 12 bits. So the DNA, the information in one cell, has 10 with 12 zeros behind it. I mean, that's bigger numbers than our government spends, okay? Big numbers. 10 to the 12 bits of data, and that's equivalent to about 100 million pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica. So who, when they grew up, had a set of the Encyclopedia Britannicas in their house? I mean, that's how you used to have. Nowadays, it's all like online, and there's infinitely more data. So it's equivalent to the cell's nucleus has the equivalent of 30 volumes of Encyclopedia Britannica for each cell. So your body, you know, the information stored in your body, if it was in encyclopedias, would probably fill up the entire city of Paducah. It's a huge volume of data that's included in our cells. Our cells have three major components. They have a membrane around the outside that encloses the stuff. And then inside is this, they call it cytoplasm. It's a watery mix with a bunch of other stuff in it. I'm not going to get into the major details of that. And those do 5 functions. And on your handout, the first one is mistyped, or the spell check, fixed communication into communion. So
I wondered how you were going to explain that. I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
I was like, why did that get there? Well, the cells communicate with other cells. The cells are a living organism. They produce waste, and they got to get rid of waste. They have to take in nutrition. Many cells can repair themselves. Okay, there are cells that don't, and cells that do. But they have a repair section and a reproduction section, because when a cell dies, like a skin cell, and it falls off, you know, there's new skin cells behind it. So you have all of this complexity just to a cell. You know, and we're going to talk about some of the other human systems and how how does this happen? How do we, just by accident, get this complexity of even a cell? It's way beyond the amount of faith that you have to believe what the Bible tells us, to believe that just happened at random. And we're going to talk about that more. So the nucleus is the control center of the cell. It has DNA. And everyone's heard of DNA before. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so you've got this DNA. I'm not going to try to pronounce it anymore. If you took the DNA in one cell and it spiraled up, if you stretched it out, it would be about 6 feet long. And if you recall, we talked about that there are cells where you can fit 20,000 of them inside an O on your paper, but every one of those 20,000 has a 6 foot long stretch of DNA. So it's real thin. Okay, it's about 6 feet long, and it contains 3.1 billion base pairs. It does something that we as humans could not even design. It stores data, it stores coded data in a chemical format. We don't have the capability to do that. I mean, Stuart could explain how a computer stores data electrically, you know, positive and minus charges, and it stores, you know, what your phone has, I don't know how many bytes of data. A lot.
There you go, a lot.
But not near this amount of data. Not even close. This is stored chemically, and then it uses another thing called RNA, and I don't know what the real name for RNA is, to decode that data. So it stores it chemically, which is really cool, and it allows it to do it in a much smaller space, and then it uses RNA to decode that code. So there were 2 men, Crick and Watson. Crick was probably the one with the sore neck. I'm joking about that. I don't know who these people are. According to their now famous model, hereditary information is transmitted from one generation to the next by means of a simple code resident in the specific sequence of certain constituents of the DNA molecule. They have discovered that there is in fact a code inscribed in the coil of life, bringing a major advance in our understanding of life's remarkable structure. So they call it the DNA, you know, coiled up, the code of life. Lester and Bolin said the DNA in living cells contains coded information It's not surprising that so many of the terms used in describing DNA and its functions in are language terms. We speak of the genetic code. DNA is transcribed in the RNA, and RNA is translated into proteins. So, again, very complex. We don't need to really understand all of that to understand that it had to be designed. Another man, Andrews, stated, "It is not possible for a code of any kind to arise by chance or accident. A code is the work of an intelligent mind. Even the cleverest dog or chimpanzee could not work out a code of any kind. It is obvious that chance cannot do it. They could no more have been the work of chance or accident than could be the Moonlight Sonata being played by mice running up and down the keyboard of a piano."
They always say, you put a tribe of chimps in a room, they won't come up to works of Shakespeare. You know,
Yeah.
no matter how long they're in there.
Now, however long they go,
Yeah.
it's a random thing. A code, and I thought that was a great point. A code, this is a genetic code, and it takes intelligence to design a code, to figure out a code. It just doesn't happen, and this is a code at the highest level. So we look at the universal design of DNA, which is also interesting because if you have a amoeba, it has DNA as well, or different animals. They have cells and they have DNA in their cells. It's not the same as ours exactly, but it's sort of a universal design. So it's a universal code. And when we look at this, Psalm 139:14 states, "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are our works. My soul knows it very well." We know that we are made, we're a great design. God is the world's and the universe's greatest designer, has made us, and we should praise him for how wonderful we are made. So let's go on to...
Brian, I was gonna say, when you think about DNA, it's always been there. But how many years did it take us to discover that we can know where somebody came from because of their DNA? That's pretty recent, really,
Yes.
in our history.
Well, they mapped the DNA, they started mapping it in the 80s, I think,
It's,
1980s, and then they wanted to map the whole human genome, and that was like years and years to map it. And then like you say, now, it's been the last few years you can get one of these DNA kits, and it's just looking at a few of those pieces of data to see who your relatives are.
They solve crimes now that were old cold cases because now they can use the DNA to figure it out.
Right. They can look at,
Yeah.
and if someone, you leave these millions of cells, and we talk about how little they are, so it doesn't take much, you touch something, and you've left DNA on it. And so they can capture that and figure out if it's you. They can figure out if if they find a dead body, if it's related, if it's, they can look at the relatives and tell, yeah, that's their kid. It's amazing the amount.
I'll tell you a story. We found a cousin because he did that DNA thing, and it matched up with one of my cousins. And it turned out that one of my uncles, when he was in Korea, had a son over there, and nobody knew about him. And now, he's part of the family, comes to family reunions, and he said, "I've got this whole family I never knew I had till I did that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know, I was in junior high age, and they just started talking about DNA. And look how much like Stuart said, how much they can do now with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has come along from something when we were all young. It was like, yeah, they knew about DNA. They talk about it, but
Yeah.
they didn't know about it like now.
Where's it gonna stop? probably they're just touching the
Oh, yeah.
hem of the garment, that even at this stage.
Well, and one can anticipate, just knowing the nature, they're gonna want to, once you figure it out, then how can we adjust it? Oh, well, I'd rather have blue eyes, you know, or my baby to have blue eyes, you know, this, you know, that's gonna be, I figure that's coming. You know, they look at, and they don't have to do a DNA test, but, you know, they can do a test and see if an unborn baby is gonna have, you know, a physical defect, and of course they use that for the evil now of they want to abort any baby that they don't think is perfect. But this is gonna become even more. They'll be wanting to do DNA test on the baby before.
And that's what I was thinking about. You know, God created us that way in the beginning. It's always been there. You know, this DNA, this system that it is our bodies.
Right.
And it's just fascinating to think that it took us this long to even figure out that small part of how our bodies work.
Right.
Only a few years ago, it was a guess, boy or girl. Now it's
No
pretty
fun
sure.
deal.
Go ahead and paint the room, we know, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, the hard part now is how to have some party to shoot purple glitter in the air and not kill anybody. Good. I appreciate the discussion. I really do want it to be a discussion class. So if y'all are ready, we'll move on to the page 6. And we're going to talk about another sort of more of a math concept here. Probability. Probability that an amino acid was created from the right mix of elements. So a cell is made up of amino acids. But what's the chance for those people, the scientists, that you could have some elements that were existing that had to be here, they weren't created, didn't come from nothing. So you got to get past the Big Bang. We got to have the right elements, and then at random we're going to figure out those are going to combine and make an amino acid. And then if we get enough amino acids that are right, then we could have a cell. If we have enough cells that are right, we can have a, that's the progression that evolution has to have. This as its basic piece, is that you create an amino acid from elements. That is the progression needed for them to have an evolution. It's like the foundation. So an amino acid, we're going to talk about that. Probability, and we may not get through all of this. Probability is the branch of math describing how likely an event is going to happen. And you can calculate the chance that something's going to happen. Okay, so when we think about probability, some folks will use the lottery as an example. And the lottery is a voluntary tax on people with poor math skills. Okay, so if you can't do math, you don't need to go buy any lottery tickets. You're wasting your money. I don't care which one it is, you're wasting your money.
Well, now, Bryce, somebody has to win.
Somebody has to win, and that is accurate. There is a winner, but they have done the math, and they know that they are making tons of money and passing out just enough to keep people coming back. You know, I mean, that's the design. Is you got to give away enough that people want to do it, but they can't do the math and figure out they're not winning. So the probability of winning the lottery is, they said, 1 in 14 million. So we're back to big numbers again, 14 with 10 zeros behind it. Okay, so 14 times 10 to the 6 means you've got a 14 and you've got 10 zeros. So 14 million, this isn't big enough to be a government number, but it's a big number. So then you look at Powerball or Mega Millions, and I don't know the details of these, okay? But they say, and I'm sure they probably have to print it on the back of the ticket, that the chance is 1 in about 300 million. So people have looked at those odds, and they have, I understand in the Florida lottery, when it gets up to enough millions, they have said, you know, if we bought every ticket, every permutation, every combination of numbers, then we will win. And we'll get the jackpot, whatever's out there on the bulletin, on the billboard, you know, it's up to, or it's in the newspaper, you know, it's up to 500 million. And my chances winning 302 million, why don't we go buy all the tickets, because I'm going to get 500 million. And of course, to be able to physically do that is a challenge, because you got to buy millions of tickets and approximately 300 million tickets. And that's going to take a group of people, and there was a financial investment group that did this once. They actually said, we can do it, we can buy all the tickets, we're going to win the lottery. Well, they're still not real good at math. Because you have to consider, if you got a loan, you know, you got to pay interest on a loan, you buy 300, I don't know what tickets are, a couple bucks maybe. You know, you got to have $600 million, and there's interest involved. There's time value of money. They don't pay you the $600 million the day you walk in there. That's over time. If you take the upfront payment, it's only a fraction. So the pot would have to be way over, you know, if it's $2 a ticket, the pot's got to be way over 600 million for you to get the money now. And then Uncle Sam is going to tax you and take a cut. So now you're at what, $1 billion pot, maybe $1.5 billion, maybe $2 billion, to come out ahead with this, I'm going to buy all the tickets. But then you got another problem, is what if someone else drew the same number and it cut the pot in half? So now you need the pot to be about 5 billion.
Do they have more than one number? I thought you just only had one number.
Now they draw, I think, about 6 numbers. They got like ping pong balls. They used to show it on TV in Florida, and it would draw. And then I think there's different colored one. The Powerball is a different color.
Powerball has to be in a certain position, which makes the odds higher, as opposed to six in a lottery and be in any order.
Right.
That's how they make the odds even higher. So you get these 5 in order, but you got to hit this number in this spot, which makes it even harder.
So they draw these. They got ping pong balls, or they look like ping pong balls. I've read that there are folks that study this, and they look, because they don't replace the balls every week, they're not new each week, and then they'll study the balls that get picked, because if one weighs just, the ink on the ball makes it weigh just a fraction more, then it's more apt to happen, and so you can increase your odds. But anyway, I'm not selling the lottery, it's a waste of your money. You're not going to make any money, you're going to just waste your money.
But you might be the one.
We will continue there next week. Thanks for the discussion.
Horse
That's the way
racing,
gamblers think, though.
Yeah, horse racing.
This is the
they
time.
call it
It's all
boxing.
you need.
You can take